Hello. I wanted to say just a few words about the recent marches, protests, and disturbances in the UK in relation to some of the unique peculiarities of the English class system, which may not be obvious to foreigners, or even some English people. The story goes that the so called Age of Deference ended in 1961 with the Profumo affair. This is regarded as one of those seminal moments in the early 1960s, like the Beatles' first LP, in the words of Philip Larkin, in 1963. These events ushered in the 1960s Cultural Revolution, during which the last remains of the old world were thrown into the dustbin of history, including the church, deference, and class. But cultural mores have a long way of living on, and are not so easily abandoned. In fact, they are often transfigured, as famously religion into nationalism and eschatology into progress. Everything must change so that everything can stay the same, in the words of Lampedusa. I propose that such it has been for the British obsession with class and deference. In a famous article in the Times in 1968, the journalist Louis Heron wrote about the death of the Age of Deference in relation to Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, stating, "The majority no longer abdicates in favour of its elite, and does not unquestioningly accept the decisions handed down." The manifest untruth of this statement is immediately obvious in the light of the COVID debacle, with its mass clapping, shaming and virtue signalling, and other mass conformities. But perhaps its untruth is even more obvious with regards to immigration. By way of example, if the inhabitants of Birmingham or Rochdale had been asked in 1945 if they wished huge swathes of their towns to become Islamic ghettos where even second or third generations speak English only as a second language, no one would have voted for this. After Powell's speech, a Gallup poll suggested his policy of repatriation had 74% public support. So it becomes obvious that mass immigration was imposed upon a reluctant mass by a tiny elite. Therefore, two questions arise. Why did the elite do this? And why did the masses go along with it? With regards to the elite, there was a slow but inexorable shift. Powell himself was, in a sense, the last of a dying breed. Rahim Kassam, in his book on Powell's speech, notes the rise of Britain's commoner career political class from the 1830s. The rise of these minority interest career politicians was accompanied by the demise of the participation of the aristocracy, high-level academia, and the church in politics. It has been a slow, steady decline since then, and its decline is not only in politics, but everywhere. People speak a lot today about dumbing down, but in many ways a greater problem is dumbing up, the moronification of the elites. As a result, it is difficult to imagine someone with the breathtaking intellect of Enoch Powell being involved in politics at all today. Instead, we have David Lammy and Liz Truss. Thus, instead of the Age of Deference, with its enlightened elite and ignorant masses, we can now speak of the ignorant elite and the ignorant mass. In the long durée of history, the impoverishment of the elite could probably be traced back further into the mists of time, beyond the 1830s, perhaps to the demise of the noblesse d'épée in favour of the noblesse de robe. How the demographically tiny liberal elite achieved victory over the traditional alliance of yobs and snobs is a complex tale too involved to go into here. Nevertheless, it did succeed, and with it came the ineluctable march of cultural Marxism, for want of a better word, through the institutions. The new mandarins still saw themselves as a benevolent patrician class which knew what was good for the plebs, but their worldview was more stunted than that of previous elites. One of their guiding principles was that traditions, ancestral connection, rootedness, and even the notion of peoples were bad and must be excised from the masses for their own good. Of course, this also entailed an epic dumbing down, not only of the masses, but of the elites themselves. You can't jettison thousands of years of tradition without reverting to infantilism. The ideological reasons as to why they hated the past and looked only to the present and the future are complex, and I will deal with these in another talk on the baleful influence of the pre-Enlightenment philosophers and their concept of tabula rasa. The political results of this ideology were what we today call multiculturalism. It ended up as a weapon used by the elite to divide and destroy their biggest opponent, the indigenous working class. The new elite was, and is, in many ways a strange beast. Dislocated from history and old world ancestral status, it was and is rightly possessed of a debilitating imposter syndrome. For example, the pinnacle of today's liberal elite's power and prestige is its control over the mainstream media, and in particular the BBC. But the news is not a real profession. It is not the red or the black. It has its origins in the music hall and town crier. It is a very lowly beast. Probably it is not possible to study journalism at Oxford even today. Perhaps despite its constant vaunting of itself, methinks it doth protest too much. The media is a very lowly business. It is not even at the level of career politics. At least they have some work responsibilities, not just picking holes in other people's business. This enormous chip which it lies on its shoulders is part of the reason for its hatred of anything with a whiff of old world status. So the liberal elite remains a tortured beast. Hated by both the yobs and the snobs, it became a master of the policy of divide and rule. Its real fear was the masses, and its policy of mass immigration and diversity was designed along with its other policies, such as the sexual revolution and the denigration of patriotism, to emasculate the threat from below. It was immensely successful. Bread and circuses combined with divide and rule have kept the masses at bay since the war. I would now like to come to my second question. Why didn't the masses rebel? And here we need to consider the long shadow of the Age of Deference. It is related to the fear and revulsion which the liberal elite, the cosmopolitan cognoscenti, have towards the white working class. This fear is immediately obvious if one is exposed to a few minutes of the BBC. All manner of programmes are littered with so-called mockneys. These are middle-class people who have affected dropping their H's in order to appear working class. The chef Jamie Oliver is the most obvious example. The Today programme's Amal Rajan is another, but none of them actually sound like Tommy Robinson. The terror which the oiks still instill in the liberal elite allows them only to appear on Love Island and other low-grade productions. But not all of the blame can be laid at the door of the liberal elite. It takes two to tango. The fact is that the Age of Deference is still very much with us. The masses may have had less genuine respect for the new elite than their old aristocratic masters, but they were, and are, still acutely aware of their own inadequacy in terms of their language and education, even though they have been hoodwinked into thinking that the new elite are educated. It was pointed out to me recently by a friend that one of the most lamentable manifestations of the obsequiousness of the masses was their copying of what they perceived to be the dominant mores of the chattering classes, even though they do not believe in these themselves. In such a way you can find genuine working class people working amongst the middle classes who go on about global warming and the wonders of diversity. This pathetic, in the true meaning of the word, aping of the liberal elite is intended to curry favour and ensure their survival and even promotion with what they perceive to be those in power. From the other side, the elite with their mockney accents show their street cred, but everyone ultimately remains in the same place. And finally, this brings me to the so-called riots. 70 years after the invasion and complete transformation of their neighbourhoods. I'm not talking about Surrey or Barnes, of course. I'm talking about Preston, Rotherham, Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Luton, Peterborough, and all the other towns where the call to prayer rings out. The indigenous masses finally decided to burn a couple of cars. The thing that has kept them silent for all these years is that the Age of Deference is still very much alive.